Down there, life continues. The traffic is awful, stocks go on trading, and Star Trek is still showing.
day, grade 8 learners. Welcome to today's Natural Sciences lesson. My name is Papuchetso Singo, and this lesson is proudly brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education. In today's lesson, we're going to be learning under the topic Interactions and Interdependence within the Environment. And the subtopic, which is our area of focus, is adaptations. It is adaptations. Now let's move on to the lesson objectives. So these are the goals that we want to achieve by the end of today. So at the end of the lesson, you should be able to define the term adaptation, discuss the adaptation in plants, describe how animals adapt to being good predators, and describe how animals adapt to living in extreme environments. Explain how animals use camouflage and mimicry as a form of adaptation. All this is sourced from your CAPS document on page 38. Now let's move on to pre-knowledge. So pre-knowledge has laid down the foundation for today's lesson. In grade 5 and in grade 6, we were introduced to the concept of an ecosystem and feeding relationships. And now in grade 8, we have been learning about ecosystems, what constitutes of an ecosystem, and we've also learned about feeding relationships. Now let's move on to today's baseline activity. I'll read out the questions, then give you time to answer them. The first question reads, a balanced ecosystem consists of blank, so you need to fill in that blank. Number 2, give 3 examples of abiotic factors that exist in an ecosystem. Number 3, name a human factor which can cause air pollution in an ecosystem. Number 4, resources that restrict the growth of populations are known as blank. So you need to fill in that blank. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer these questions. Then after 5 minutes, we will do the solutions together. Don't forget to send in your answers to our WhatsApp number, which is at the bottom of the screen. So see you after 5 minutes. Welcome back, grade 8 learners. Now let's go through the questions together. A balanced ecosystem consists of blank. It consists of only enough organisms that the food, water, and habitats can supply. And then give 3 examples of abiotic factors that exist in an ecosystem. It could be any of the following, just choose 3. Water, air, sunlight, soil, rainfall, nutrients, temperature, wind, any of these 3. And then name a human factor which can cause a pollution in an ecosystem. What human factor can cause air pollution in an ecosystem? That is burning of fossil fuels. So when those fossil fuels are burning, they'll be releasing gases into the atmosphere, therefore causing air pollution. So that is one of the human factors that we learned about in our last week's lesson, if you remember last week's lesson. And then resources that restrict the growth of population are known as. What are these resources that restrict the growth of population? They are known as limiting factors. They are known as limiting factors. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to quickly copy down the corrections. Don't forget to send in your answers and any questions you may have to our WhatsApp number, which is at the bottom of the screen, 07957822908. So see you after 2 minutes. Welcome back, grade 8 learners. Now let's move on to terminology. These terms will help us better understand the concepts that we are going to learn today. The first term is extinct. What do you think extinct means? This term means eliminated or no longer in existence. Eliminated or no longer in existence. Adaptation. Adaptation means a feature or an appearance that makes a plant or animal well suited to survive in its environment. It helps it to be well suited in its environment. And then camouflage. Camouflage, this means blending in to hide from prey or predators with surroundings, or blending in with the surroundings in order to hide from prey or predators. And then mimicry. Mimicry means trying to look like something else. Trying to look like something else. Now, can you define the word adaptation? Can you? You can send your responses to the WhatsApp number if you can, or try to define the word adaptation. Well, it is not just a characteristic or appearance, but but it is actually a process of gradual change. So adaptation is a process of gradual change. And adaptation, what is it? It is any change in an organism's structure, function, or behavior that is carried through to the next generation. So it's carried through from the parents to the offspring. It is carried from the parents to the offspring. What does it do? Adaptation allows the organism to survive as it adapts to changing conditions within an environment. We all know that environment is constantly changing. So organisms, they adapt to these changes that happen within an environment. So adaptation is actually a necessary thing. So if ever there's an organism that is unable to adapt to changes within an environment, which means this organism will die out and become extinct. Extinct, it means it is no longer in existence if it fails to adapt to changes within an environment, that particular habitat in which it lives in. If it fails to adapt, it may become extinct. It will die out and become extinct. Alright, so now what are structural adaptations? Now let's learn about structural adaptation. Now here we are talking about the physical characteristics that a species has. For example, such as having very long legs or strong muscles, like the camel over here. So this is a camel and it has long legs and strong muscles. So these long legs and strong muscles are an adaptation to the environment in which the camel lives. So the camel needs these strong legs, it needs these strong muscles for the environment in order to survive in this particular environment. And this is called a structural adaptation. This is called a structural adaptation. Now, what about functional adaptation? Functional adaptation. What is it? Right. A species may have a special way of carrying out its life processes. Do you remember the life processes when we were introducing photosynthesis and respiration? We reminded each other about the life processes that we learned about in previous grades. So some species have special ways of carrying out those 7 life processes: movement, sensitivity to areas, respiration, reproduction. So they have special ways of carrying out these life processes, such as being able to produce eggs that have a hard shell. So it is important for some species to produce eggs that have a hard shell. This is to make sure that the embryos inside of the eggs can grow and hatch even if the climate changes, no matter whether it becomes colder or hotter or wetter. These embryos will be able to grow and to hatch because of this functional change, And then next, we are going to learn about behavioral adaptation. Behavioral adaptation. What is it? Well, the species can have special behaviors that are instinctive and can be learned. And one example is making a nest. I'm sure you've seen birds making nests to lay their eggs in and protect their babies. So this is a behavior that species has learned, that in order to protect our offspring, we need to build a nest. So they find a nice tall tree, or they find a corner on the roof of a house to build a nest in order to grow and to protect their young ones. So there is a bird there feeding its young ones up in that nest. So this is a behavioral adaptation. The bird has learned that in order to provide a safe environment for my offspring, I need to build a nest. And then they find the perfect place to build a nest, and then they build a nest to protect their offspring. Now, how can the changing environmental conditions how are they related, or how are they related to adaptation? So we're going to learn about changing environment conditions and adaptations. How are these two related? Are they even related? Now, the environment may become hot and dry, leading to a shortage of resources. Remember those resources that we learned about last week? We said they are food, water, sunlight, and shelter. So the climate can change and lead up to these resources becoming fewer, or becoming or they or a situation where there's now a shortage of these resources. Now, some living organisms have characteristics that can help them to survive such changes. If ever there is a change in the environment, some living organisms are capable of surviving these changes. Now, living organisms are adapted to certain environments by chance or by accident. They are adapted by chance or by accident. For example, if we look at this lizard there, it's hiding itself. So it is the color of the sand. Let's say maybe the environment became hotter and drier, so leading to less vegetation being in that particular environment, but the lizard needs to hide. It needs to hide from predators, so maybe it adapted the color. It changed physically to the color of the sand, or it adapted by changing its behavior and digging itself into the sand in order to hide maybe from its prey, or to hide from its predators, to hide from its prey or from its predators. Now, adaptations can also be passed from a parent to their offspring. So, in any population, each individual is slightly different, and these differences are called variations. So, in any population, the offspring and the parents are slightly different. So, these changes are called an adaptation. If we look at this zebra here, the zebra over here, it is quite different from the other zebras within the population, and this is called a variation. It is different from the other zebras in the herd, and this is called a variation. So it's different from its parents. This is the offspring, which is quite different from its parents. Now, a variation can help an individual to do the following. One, to survive better. If we look at these birds here, so these birds are called finches. If we look at their beaks in particular, their beaks are quite different. So this is a variation. So this variation can help these birds survive better in terms of the environment where these birds are found, or the ecosystem and what these birds eat. So the shape of the bird depends on whether it's a seed-eating bird, or it's insects or small invertebrates, or it needs to dig for its food, or it needs to dig. So this is the variation that exists between this family of finches. Now, a variation can also help an individual to reproduce and pass on its beneficial characteristics onto its young, onto its offspring. And then once these variations are passed on, the whole population will change and will grow. So you find that different finches, depending on what they feed on, depending on the area where they are found, they have different beaks. This is because this variation would have been passed from parent to offspring, from generation to generation. So that is one advantage of a variation. But however, not all variation turn out to be very useful to individuals. For example, it can make the survival of the animal difficult. So it can make it difficult for an animal to survive, or sometimes there may be no effect at all. If we look at this albino frog, so this is a result of a variation. This albino frog, now in before the variation, or in its normal look, the frog is able to hide within the plants or hide in the water or camouflage itself. Now, when it looks like this, when it is now an albino, which means its predators are able to see it clearly, it cannot hide away from its predators. Its prey are also able to see the frog very, very clearly, which means it cannot hunt its prey or it cannot hide as it hunts for its prey. So this is an obvious disadvantage, and which means that it's going to make the life of this frog very difficult. It will make it very difficult for the frog to survive. Now, sometimes a variation cannot have any effect at all. If we look at the human species, some human beings have an earlobe and some human beings don't have an earlobe or it's retracted. This has no effect in your hearing at all. Those who have this type of earlobe can hear just as well as people who have this type of ear. So there is no effect at all on the individual, whether you have a low hanging earlobe or you don't have one, you have one that is attached. So there is no effect on the main function of the organ, which is hearing. There is no effect whatsoever. Now let's learn about adaptation in plants. How are plants adapted, or how are some plants adapted to live in their particular environments? Now, plants that live in water may have the following adaptations. So we know that we have plants, we have terrestrial plants, and we've got aquatic plants. So aquatic plants have adaptations that suit them, or adaptations that allow them to survive in the water. Right. For example, water lilies have more breathing pores. Remember, plants photosynthesize. So there's gaseous exchange that happens because the plant requires oxygen and produces carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. And during respiration, the plant requires oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. So there has to be gaseous exchange. And we know gaseous exchange can be a bit difficult in the water. So the water lilies have adapted in this way. They have more breathing pores or stomata on the top side of the leaf, the part that is exposed to the atmosphere, than on the underside. So their gaseous exchange, or the exchange of gases can move into and out of the leaf more on the top side of the leaf. So this is a special structural adaptation, or it's a special functional adaptation that allows the life processes within the plants to happen. So now the breathing pores are found more on the top of the leaf than on the bottom of the leaf. Now, plants that grow in deserts, you know, there are some areas that are very dry, that have dry extreme conditions, such as a desert. Plants that live in deserts also have adaptations. I know you may wonder, how is this plant growing in the desert? How is it possible for this plant growing in the desert, considering the shortage of resources? Now, there's a plant called gazania. This gazania is gray. It has gray hairy leaves to reflect the sun. So they reflect the sun and make sure that the plant doesn't get hot and dry and then die. So there is the gazania plant with gray hairy leaves. Now those hairs, they have another special function. This function is to trap moisture and reduce moisture loss. So as moisture is being trapped and reduced, it also cools the plant. Remember, deserts can be very, very, very hot. Some deserts can be very hot. So the hairs are very good adaptation that allow the plant to trap moisture, to reduce water loss, and to keep the plant cool and make sure that it doesn't get hot and get dry and then die. Now, these plants also flower. They have flowers that they produce, and these flowers play a very important role in the survival of the plant. They attract insects for pollination. Now let's learn about aloe plants, another different plant that we can learn about. Now, aloe plants have the following adaptations that allow them to grow and survive in different areas. For example, superficial roots. Now, what is a superficial root? A superficial root is a root that grows just at the surface of the soil or above the surface of the soil. So aloe plants have this type of roots. What do they serve? What purpose do these roots serve? These roots allow a efficient absorption of water over a large area when it rains. Remember, these aloe plants grow in extremely dry areas where rain is scarce. So whenever there is water available, the roots are ready to absorb any water whenever it rains. Now, these roots are special. They have a special structure. They have a layer of cork that prevents water loss. That layer of cork covering the roots prevents the roots from losing any water, because this plant is growing in an area where water is scarce and therefore needs as much water as it can get, and it needs to prevent the loss of any water. Now, these are thick, the roots are also thick and very fleshy to make sure that the water is stored effectively. Now, here's the picture of aloe plant roots. They are superficial. As you can see, they are very close to the stem, which means they are very close to the ground. They are very close to the surface of the ground, so that if there's any rainfall or any water that is available, these roots will make sure that they absorb all the water. They are covered in this corky brown structure to make sure that they don't lose any water. Now, how else is the aloe plant adapted to live in extreme environments? Now, it has a vertical short stem. Its stem is very, very short. It's very, very short, and this is very good because it reduces water loss. Water is not going to be lost into the environment. Now, the dead older leaves covering the stem also prevent water loss. So the main idea here is that the plant prevents water loss because it grows in dry areas where there is a water shortage, and it has large, thick, fleshy leaves that store large amounts of water, and these leaves are covered by a wax layer covering. It also prevents transpiration. Transpiration is loss of water. When leaves lose water, it's called transpiration. So that wax, it prevents the loss of water, or rather limits water loss. So here is a picture of an aloe. It has quite a short stem, superficial roots, thick fleshy leaves, and it is adapted to grow in very, very extremely dry areas that receive very little rainfall. Now, let's move on to today's first activity. Now, we're going to read this paragraph about the quiver tree of the Kalahari and Namib Desert, and then answer the questions that follow. Now, the quiver tree lives in the Namib and Kalahari deserts, where the heat and lack of water makes it extremely difficult for the plants to grow and survive. It stores its water inside green succulent leaves and bloated branches. The sun used to hollow out the branches and use them for their quivers, which is where the tree gets its name from. The branches are covered with a white powder that reflects the heat, and the leaves have very few pores to minimize water loss through evaporation. Now, during extremely harsh weather conditions, the tree can amputate, which means remove, its own branches and reduce the leaves to minimize water loss even further. Then, when the conditions improve, it sends out new shoots and grows a rich leafy top again. Now, here's the question. How is the species adapted to life in its habitat? Explain your answers in detail for 6 marks. Alright, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer these questions, and then after 5 minutes, we will do the solutions together. Now, see you after 5 minutes. Welcome back, grade 8. Now let's answer the question. So we are supposed to list, or rather explain, how is this quiver tree adapted to its environment. So here are the solutions. 1. It has succulent leaves. Succulent leaves store water inside of them. 2. It has bloated branches, also for water storage. 3. The fine powder that covers the leaves. It reflects heat from the tree so that the tree doesn't overheat and lose more water. It has very few pores on the leaves. This minimizes loss of water through evaporation. And 5, it reduces the branches during extreme weather conditions. So it loses its branches. And this helps to reduce further water loss. And 6, new shoots grow when the weather conditions improve. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to quickly copy down the corrections. Then after 1 minute, we will continue with our lesson. Welcome back, grade 8. Now let's continue with our lesson. Now, we're going to learn about adaptation in animals. We've been learning about adaptation in plants. Now let's move on to adaptations in animals. Now, animal adaptation for extreme environment. Now, the camel. So the camel is one animal that lives in a very extreme environment. They live in hot, dry deserts. So how is the camel adapted to live in hot, dry deserts? So there is a picture of a camel for those of you who don't know what a camel looks like. So there is a picture of a camel. Now the camel has a hump over here. So it has a hump which stores fat. So within this hump is actually a storage of fat. Okay, so it stores fats within its hump. So because of its hump and all these fats that are stored in its hump, it can go for weeks without water and several months without food. So this is a good storage pack to have. Now, its body can tolerate high temperatures. Remember, deserts are hot and very, very dry. So it can survive hot or extremely high temperatures, and it doesn't need to sweat. When it gets to the 40s, we usually sweat, don't we? But camels don't sweat in 40 degrees Celsius temperatures. They don't sweat. Okay, so here are some more adaptations. So it has very wide feet. The camel has very wide feet. This helps to spread its load on the desert sand, so it doesn't sink whenever it is walking. It doesn't sink whenever it's walking. It has long eyelashes and hairs inside of its nostrils. This helps to keep the sand out of its eyes and out of its nose. They have thick leathery lips so that when they are eating tough prickly desert plants, they don't injure themselves. So those are the adaptations of the camel. Now let's look for another animal that lives in an extreme environment. The polar bear. The polar bear lives in a very extremely cold environment. How is it adapted? It has a thick layer of white fur. You can see it is white, it has a thick layer of white fur that helps to keep it warm. It also acts as camouflage as it looks exactly like the snow. So it helps to camouflage the polar bear. Now it has fur on the soles of its feet. It has fur on the soles of its feet for warmth. Remember, ice is extremely cold. And under its skin, there's a very thick layer of fat. This helps to keep the polar bear warm. It has very small ears. It has very small ears. This helps to reduce body heat loss. So it keeps warm. It keeps a very warm internal body temperature, and it doesn't lose the heat through its ears. It has large paws to spread the load on snow and ice. So just like the camel, it has large paws that spread its load on the surface on which it is walking. On the surface on which it is walking. Now, how predators adapted to their environment or to hunting. Now, predators have adaptations that enable them to catch their prey and hold their prey. One such predator is the cheetah. A cheetah has a very good eyesight, so it can see from very far and near distances. It has very long legs, narrow, light body, for acceleration and braking power. So if it needs to do a sudden stop, it has that braking power to do so. It can run very fast for short distances, so if it needs to quickly run and catch prey, it can do so. And it has a long muscular tail as a counterweight for balance. Look at that long muscular tail. It's very good because it keeps balance, keeps the cheetah balance as it is running. So what are the other adaptations that cheetahs have? There is a picture of a cheetah. They are well camouflaged, which helps them get close to their prey. So the color of their fur is the same as the color of their surroundings. So it allows the cheetah to move very close to their prey without the prey being able to see it. They have very strong, sharp claws and teeth to hold, kill, and tear the flesh of their prey. They are the sharp claws that help it to hold their prey. And because they don't hunt in the dark, they actually hunt during the day, their face has these stripes. These stripes, they help them they protect the cheetah's eyes from the glare of the sun, so that when it's hunting, it is not affected by the glare of the sun. Now let's learn about camouflage. Now animals, we've been learning so far that they use different methods to avoid predators, like that lizard that was sinking itself inside of the sand. Now, camouflage is very important. It's a special feature that helps organisms to blend within their environments or surroundings. So some are well camouflaged. They can have colors and shapes that are similar to the environment, and they can keep still and hide when the enemies are near. Like the chameleon, for example, it can change to the color of its environment and keeps very still so that the enemies don't spot it. And some animals resemble other animals and plants in color and behavior. Now let's move on to mimicry. Mimicry is actually a form of trickery. Its purpose is to fool or to trick predators into thinking that this particular animal is something that is more dangerous than it is. Like if you look at this caterpillar. So many caterpillars have fake eyes or fake spots, so that when a predator approaches, it will think that it looks very dangerous because it has all of these eyes. Another animal that enjoys mimicry or makes use of mimicry is the milk snake. It looks like the coral snake. The coral snake is the more poisonous one, and the milk snake is the one that is not poisonous, but they look alike, so that if a predator approaches, they'll think the milk snake is the coral snake. They'll think the milk snake is the coral snake. If we look at this coral snake, the venomous one, it looks quite similar to the scarlet king snake, which is actually non-venomous. So that is a method of mimicry. Now let's move on to the second activity. Question 1. The camel is adapted to live in the desert. Which adaptation ensures the camel has an adequate supply of energy? Number 2. Polar bears have small ears to blank. So you need to fill in that blank. And 3. Describe how the different organisms here in the table below below, sorry, are adapted to live in their specific environments. A leopard, and B, a chameleon. So I'm going to give you 4 minutes to answer these questions. Then after 4 minutes, we will do the solutions together. Welcome back, grade 8 learners. Now let's go through the questions together. The camel is adapted to live in the desert. Which adaptation ensures that the camel has an adequate supply of energy? Where do we get our energy from? We get our energy from food. And where does the camel store its food? It stores the food in the hump. So that is the adaptation. Now, polar bears have small ears too. What is their function? Those small ears reduce heat loss from the body because it is very cold. So the polar bear should stay very warm, so it has small ears to make sure that it has low heat loss. Now, how are the different organisms below adapted to live in their specific environments? We've got a leopard and we have a chameleon. How is the leopard adapted to living in its environment? The leopard, if you remember, or if is camouflaged due to coloring and spots, so it can easily hide in the grass when it is hunting. So it helps it hide away from prey so that it can get as close as possible before chasing. Now the leopard is adapted to run fast over short periods and catch its prey. It has a light, streamlined body and strong legs, and it has a tail for balance to 10 sharp corners. Now, what about the chameleon? So, camouflage helps the chameleon to blend in with their surroundings. It is well camouflaged. They have colors and shapes that are similar to the environment and keep still when enemies are nearby. They keep still when enemies are nearby. So I'm going to give you a quick minute to copy down number 3. To copy down number 3, 1 minute. So see you after 1 minute. Welcome back, grade 8 learners. So there's a student from Seshonguve SOS who sent in their solutions. Well done, and thank you for sending through your solutions for the baseline activity. So keep doing the work and sending in your solutions to the WhatsApp number that is at the bottom of the screen. Now, we have come to the end of our lesson. Now let's wrap up our lesson and find out what we learned today. So, what is an adaptation? We learned that it's not just a characteristic or appearance, but a process of gradual change. So, living organisms go through processes of gradual changes in order to fit or to survive in the environments that they live in. Now, an adaptation is categorized as any change in an organism's structure, function, or behavior that is carried through to the next generation. For example, the camel has very long legs and strong muscles that help it to walk long distances and carry its big body around. Now, the other plants have different functions or how they carry out their life processes, like water lilies. Their leaves have more stomata on the top side, the part that is exposed to the atmosphere. Or it could be behavioral. Birds build nests to protect their eggs, which will eventually hatch into their young. So they build nests. So this behavior helps the bird to protect its young. And these type of adaptations are carried on to the next generation. Next, an adaptation allows an organism to survive as to the constantly or rather to the changing environment. For example, there are different species of finches that are found in South Africa, but they are quite different the way their beaks are shaped. This is due to what kind of food or what they have to do in order to get food. Some they have a specific beak shaped for the insects that they eat, or if it's a seed-eating bird, or if it is an invertebrate-eating bird. So the shape of the beak, or how it builds its nest, or where it builds its nest, that is also an adaptation that is for survival. Now, organisms that are unable to adapt to changes in the environment, well, there's a sad story for them. They die out and become extinct. So organisms need to adapt to changing environments for survival, to ensure that their species, or to ensure that their population continues to grow, to ensure that their population continues to grow. Now, we also learned about specific organisms. Some use camouflage and mimicry to protect themselves from danger, like how the caterpillar has so many spots that look like eyes in order to look dangerous to its predators or any other predator that might want to devour the caterpillar. Now, some animals by mimicry. Mimicry means that to look like something else. So some animals look like the dangerous versions, or rather they look like other dangerous animals, and this helps them to hide away from prey, like how the milk snake looks like the dangerous coral snake. It looks like the dangerous coral snake, so it helps to protect itself from danger. And then camels have the following adaptations that allow them to survive in deserts. They have wide feet that help to spread the load on the ground. They've got a hump that stores fat, which means the camel can go for long periods of time without needing water or food. They have long eyelashes and hairy noses that help to keep sand away from its eye and its nose. And the camel is very resistant to heat, which means it doesn't sweat, meaning the camel is not going to lose any water. Polar bears also have the following adaptations that help them to survive in extreme environments. They've got wide feet that spread the load on the snow. They've got a thick layer of feet under its skin to make sure that it stays warm. They have small ears to reduce heat loss, and they look like the snow, which serves as a camouflage. And then we've got the aloe plant. They have the following adaptations that allow them to survive and grow in dry areas. So they have superficial roots, meaning their roots are just on the surface or just above the surface, so that if there's any water running in that particular area, the aloe plant can quickly absorb that water. Their roots have a cork covering, which reduces water loss. Their roots are also thick and fleshy, which increases absorption and make sure that they stay with water. It has a short stem to prevent water loss, and they have thick fleshy leaves. These leaves also have a wax lining to prevent water loss by transpiration, as well as to keep as much water as the aloe plant can, to keep as much water as the aloe plant can. All right, grade 8, thank you so much for joining me in today's lesson. I hope to see you in the next one. Until next time, grade 8, goodbye.